In discussions about intelligent design, there is probably no objection that is as frequently repeated as the argument from imperfection. So what I'm going to be doing is going through the rationale behind this argument and why this argument is flawed. But before I do that, let us understand what exactly is argument from imperfection. You can briefly summarize the argument from imperfection as follows. If there exists an intelligent agent who designed life on Earth, then it would have been designed with no apparent flaws. Now, this argument seems to have force with people. It's an argument that has a measure of popular appeal. But if you really think about it, it is in fact a flip side of Diogenes and Socrates' earlier argument in the Greek tradition. Diogenes, for example, was very impressed with the design in the regularity of seasons, and likewise, Socrates, he was impressed with the design in the proximity of nose and eyes to the mouth. So if something had fitted the idea of the way things ought to be, then these earlier Greek philosophers, likewise all the other pre-Darwinian philosophers and scientists, would consider that to be an evidence for design. Whereas the Darwinists of our time, they argue in complete opposite direction. For them, just because something does not fit the idea of the way things ought to be, then it becomes evidence against design. So on one side, you have an argument from earlier traditions, which is that just because something fits the idea of the way things ought to be, then it is designed. And then you have after Darwin, which the argument is that just because something does not fit our idea of the way things ought to be, then it is evidence against design. So it's the flip side of the same coin here. So in discussions about Darwinian evolution and intelligent design, what you will find is that this is probably the most repeated argument used to refute intelligent design. Here you can see Kenneth Miller using the argument from imperfection against intelligent design theory in his technology review in 1994. He writes that another way to respond to the theory of intelligent design is to carefully examine complex systems for errors that no intelligent designer would have committed. So what Miller seeks here is imperfections in nature in order to argue a case against intelligent design theory. So Miller is elegantly expressing a basic confusion in his writing, and that confusion is the expectation that intelligent design theory must produce perfections at any cost. So his argument is critically dependent on perfection, the idea of perfections at any cost. So there must be perfection for intelligent design to exist as a valid theory. But this is a confusion regarding the postulate of intelligent design. So before I explain that, why this is a confusion, let us see what we observe and experience from the product designers. So you find that designers do not always make the best designs despite having the ability to do so. So having the ability to do something and doing it are two different things. There's a clear distinction between these two ideas. Sometimes I'm able to do something, but I choose not to do it. Other times I choose to do something, but I am not able to do it. So there is a disconnect here. So to draw this dichotomy when we argue the case here, it's very important. So the argument from imperfection is dependent on the knowledge regarding the motives of the doer of something and why he does it. Whereas a designer may have multiple motives that are unknown to us. So it's not impossible that engineering excellence is sometimes relegated to secondary roles because the designer had another motive behind the design of a particular product. That's a possibility that cannot be ruled out. This is why throughout the pre-Darwinian history, people accepted life to be well designed despite having the knowledge that there is death, there is sickness, there is disabilities, there are other imperfections rife in nature, or apparent imperfections rife in nature. But because we didn't know the motives behind why these things occur or appear to us to be imperfect, or what's the motive of the designer of making these imperfections in nature, such an argument didn't have a force with people of that time. It's an argument that has force with people of our time after Darwin rather than before Darwin. So a product is sometimes intentionally designed with an artificially limited useful life. For example, there is a concept known as built-in obsolence. This is also known as planned obsolence. So in other words, a product is intentionally made so that it will not last as long as it will. For example, we have contrived durability, which is where a designer designs a product that deteriorates very quickly or within a planned time. And this is with the strategy of shortening the product's lifetime so that when the new product is designed, it can sell at a faster rate or at a good turnaround time. You also have prevention of repairs where a designer designs a single-use versions of products which are usually disposable and prevents the buyer in repairing those products. So these are some imperfections in the product which are intended, and these are very motive-based. This argument is based on the knowledge of the motives of the designer. You can see from our experience that we cannot always know that. There's another concept known as perceived obsolescence, where designers change the styling of products. So you get new styles come to the market and old styles go out of fashion. And the fact that there is a decrease in perceived desirability of the old unfashionable items leads to a higher demand for new products. Hence, we have higher turnaround in the new products and old products go out of market. So this is a built-in obsolescence that we know from our experience. Here is an example of built-in obsolescence or perceived obsolescence, for example. You have Apple changing the styling of their products. So new products have come, which is 5, and the old product 2G has gone out of fashion. So they use people's decrease in desirability for old products like 2G to sell new products. So 2G may have imperfections relative to 4S or 5 from a Darwinian point of view. But what we know from observations and experiences that these apparent imperfections were built-in obsolences. They were there for a motive which was not known to us. Yet there is another deeper problem with the argument from imperfection, which is that the argument from imperfection is critically dependent on psychoanalysis of the unidentified designer. In other words, it rests on the prior knowledge of what a designer would or would not do. And we don't always have that prior knowledge of what a designer would have done or would not have done. It depends on a psychological evaluation. So the neo-Darwinist argument from imperfections actually a psychological evaluation that's being used as positive evidence for undirected evolution. But do we know the mental state of the designer? Such knowledge is virtually impossible in many cases unless a designer tells us the reasons for why he or she has designed a particular product. Let's give you an example. If one was to ask, why did the ancient Egyptians use the pyramid shape when they designed the tombs of the earlier pharaohs? Egyptologists will give you different theories. For example, one theory may be that the pyramids represented the first land to appear at the beginning of time, which some articles refer to as a hill called Ben. Some other Egyptologists may give you another theory. They may say that pyramids had sloping edges so that the dead pharaohs could symbolically climb to the sky and live forever. Yet you might find other Egyptologists giving a totally different theory that pyramids represented the rays of the sun. But no one really knows for sure the motive behind why these pyramids were designed in a pyramid shape. We can detect the pyramid shape, but we don't know the motives. So the point is that the answer to this question is critically dependent on a psychoanalysis of the designer. And no one really knows authoritatively and conclusively why pyramids were designed in a pyramid shape. But what we do know for sure here is that the pyramids are in a pyramid shape, and we can detect that. So if a neo-Darwinist refuses to accept pyramid shape here merely because we do not know the motives behind why the shape is as it is, then this is a ridiculous approach to doing science. Why should a scientist refuse to accept what is detectable merely because there is an unidentified motive behind why that detectable entity is as it is? So here is Behe telling us just that. He writes in his book, Darwin's Black Box, the point of scientific interest is not the internal mental state of the designer, but whether one can detect design. In other words, what Behe is saying is that knowing the identity of designer is scientifically unimportant. Intelligent design doesn't concern itself with that. Intelligent design is a theory that concerns itself with a scientific question, which is about the detection of design. And it doesn't need to identify who the designer is. Just as much as an Egyptologist doesn't need to identify why the pyramids were designed in a pyramid shape. Likewise, the intelligent design theory doesn't need to identify the designer. Egyptologists can theorize about the pyramid shape and give ideas about who may have done it, but the detection of the pyramid shape is self-evident, and that the scientist can engage in that question of the shape. Likewise, intelligent design can be detected, but it doesn't, its identity need not be known for the theory of intelligent design to be valid theory. Now, the thing is, he is not alone in this concern. Here you have Freeman Dyson, who discussed why aliens living on other planets may build artificial structures that are visible to us on our planet, Earth. And in that discussion, he writes, I do not need to discuss questions of motivation. Who would want to do these things or why? Why does the human species explode hydrogen bombs or send rockets to the moon? It is difficult to say exactly why. So the questions of motivation, Dyson is saying, are difficult to know with precision. And it is difficult to say exactly why in this situation of when you're talking about questions related to motivations of certain creatures or certain things or designer. So it is, the science is not interested in the question of motivation. Science is interested in detection of structures. And that you can do in this situation without knowing the motivations.